Hey everyone, it is Lucid, and we're going to be doing a national overview for Ubar, and that is because I'm going to be playing them in a game. So, for those of you who are not super involved in the Dominion scene, Ubar is a reasonably new nation. I believe it's the newest nation, though there's potentially one I'm missing. Maybe it came after Vedheim, I can't remember. Anyway, it's very new, but, you know, by very new I mean a few months old. And yeah, they're really cool. It's an early age nation. It's a nation of Djinn. It's the predecessor nation to Nabah. And yeah, I am super stoked about playing them. They have a bunch of really interesting mechanics. And yeah, we're going to get into it and talk about them. So, first off, the national we'll do high level stuff. It's got a lot of slave troops. A lot of the humans are slaves. These guys with bronze armor, they're all slaves. The camels are not slaves. Neither are these guys, but these guys are recruit anywhere. So the guys you get out of forts are slaves. The guys you get recruit anywhere are not slaves. You can also get these ghouls, which are demons, and they have poison resistance and fire resistance, and they don't need to eat, and they regenerate, and they have a second form, and they're stealthy. So those are all pretty cool things, and they have spirit sight. So anyway, we're gonna kind of talk about them in more detail. I kind of got in a little too deep there, but for now they have a bunch of these normal troops, which are either recruit anywhere or foreign recruit even, and they have these Djinn warrior that they get at the beginning, and these guys are pretty cool. They have kind of a suite of things that most genies have, which is shock resistance, a ton of fire resistance, susceptible to cold, magic being, and ethereal, flying, stealthy, glamour, which is going to give them mirror image basically in combat, and then unseen, which is very special for Ubar. Basically, unseen units are invisible, which means attackers get a minus 10 penalty to their attack until they get hit. And once they get hit, well, then that goes away. So anyway. Then they have iron vulnerability, which means if they take damage made of ordinary non-magic iron, then they get spanked. I wonder if you have magic weapons, if that interacts with that. I'll have to find out. We'll find out in the game, because I'm recording this now and I can't find out until I go ask people. But arrow tips do not contain enough iron to inflict extra damage, so that's interesting. Because, yeah, that would be punishing if you got hit by arrows. And then they all have vulnerability to salt. Salt is basically enchanted salt. It's a Earth 1 item that you can make, and it just wrecks these guys. It basically permastuns them if you have it and you're attacking them, and it hits a whole tile and it never misses. It's pretty devastating. But it's pretty situational, because there's no like battlefield-wide salt or huge salt spells that I know of. And then they have Wasteland Survival, Spirit Sight, Magic Power, so they don't fight very well in Drain Scales, and then Storm Immunity. That's basically the deal with these guys. They're cap only. So we basically have slaves, we have cap-only dudes, we have a mage line, and we have human mages, which are recruit anywhere, and we'll talk about them. And then we have Djinn that we get. The other kind of main thing about this nation is you start off with this one, the Three Deserts, this one, the Iram of 1,000 Pillars, and at a certain point in time, you get Jinnah, which gives you +1 nature gem and increases growth. This is when your pretender wakes up. And then you get City of Brass, which gives you +1 fire, and then allows you to recruit these guys. And then you also get this, which gives you an extra 100 gold a turn. And all three of these last buildings come online when your pretender wakes up. So there's kind of this incentive to get your pretender to wake up as early as possible. That being said, the earliest you can have them wake up is your dormant, right? So like year 1.5. So that's a zinger. So without any further ado, let's get into the actual units. We're going to start off talking about the mages, the commanders, right? So we've got a scout, We have a commander with 60 leadership and taskmaster +2. Not bad, but he cannot lead magic beings, and that's significant. He's inspirational -1, so there. We've got these guys who are 40 leadership and they're tax collectors, which means they're pretty good for deep raiding. And they can pillage, which is always fun. And yeah, we've got these guys are kind of interesting. These are your budget mages. These are like your super duper cheap mages. They have almost no upkeep, 28 a year. They come out in Fire 1, Air 1, and Earth 1. And these, in general, are not super great paths. And if you watch other people's guides, they're probably going to say, these guys suck. I have a different opinion on them. I think these guys are actually reasonably good. And the reason is they're sacred. And with fire in a jar, which you potentially could have kind of a lot of, with fire in a jar, these guys get up to fire 2, doing Phoenix Power. And with Phoenix Power, they can drop Pillar of Fire. Now, you may be saying, Lucid, Pillar of Fire is, you know, that's fire. I mean, that's Evocation 8. That's not even relevant. Well, this is one of the nations that I think, and I think it's going to be how I play them, but this is one of the nations that can rush Evocation and, like, deep dive down in it. And they also are going to be wanting to have Storm up all the time, because they've got Storm immunity on most of their troops, which means all the Air 1s become Air 2. And Air 2 are useful. You know, they're not going to be able to do Thunderstrike, but they're going to be able to do, they're going to be able to do Orb Lightning, which is really good. Our other randoms, a lot of our mages are going to be able to cast Scorching Winds. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, basically it's going to be Orb, Lightning, and Shockwave. But these are pretty solid. You know, they're pretty good. And then Lightning Bolt is not bad. You know, it's 14 armor negating damage. Even if people have a shock resistance bless, this is still going to kind of zap them. Unless they have, like, super shock resistance. So, you know, it's not bad. It's not bad at all. And they're super cheap. And because this is also a nation where our Djinn get magic power, you really want to take magic scales. And if you take magic scales, these guys are pretty good researchers. 10 research on a sacred mage for 70 gold. If you have time to get a bunch of your infrastructure up, these guys are going to be pretty solid. And if you get Conjuration 3 and you're getting rushed, these guys, you know, in a pinch can pop out baby elementals, which enough baby elementals can do a lot of damage. So they're okay, you know, on the defense. The Earth ones aren't great. The Earth ones, what I'll say is you don't really get better than Earth 1 on your nation, except for a couple of your really high tier units. And those don't have feet. So, you know, these guys potentially with some Earth Boots, they're going to be, you know, as good at Earth Mages as you're going to have for a while. And with Earth Boots, you know, they can do some in Earth Power and then be Earth 3 and then do some of the important Earth buffs. So, but generally the Earth one's not super useful, but these can all make elementals if you're getting rushed. Or on the defense, let's just say. Next, we have the Tuba. These are interesting. They have a fire variety, or they come with fire built in, and then they get a fire, air, earth random. What this means is they're going to get either fire 2 or fire air or fire earth. And fire earth, not super great. Let's just be real about that. They can do magma. We'll look at this, the spells real quick these guys can do. So they can do, what was it, Alteration? Okay, yeah, they can do, if you do the fire earth ones, if you give them a fire gem, a fire gem and an earth gem, or, you know, some temporary gem item like a fire in a jar, they can do Phoenix Power, Earth Power, and then drop a couple magma eruptions. You know, which is a good spell, but having to do that just to be able to drop this, and it has a ton of fatigue. Not a huge fan. The fire air ones, they're only going to be fire 1, air 1. So even when you get them up to fire 2, they're not going to be able to do Smokeless Flame, which is a really good spell. They're only going to be able to do, well, unless you give them extra fire gems, right? So not super good on this. The fire air, not great. They can do if you do storm power, they can do Scorching Wind, which is pretty good. It's going to basically do fatigue damage in a reasonably big area of effect, and your troops are going to be immune to this. So pretty good. If you're fighting elites or something, and it's going to be MR negates, and it doesn't affect undead inanimate. It also doesn't affect things with whatchamacallit, wasteland survival. So but yeah, because it's an MR check and it's a pretty big area of effect and it doesn't affect your own dudes, if you drop this a lot on your front line versus like elites, you'll fatigue people out. So anyway, this is something they can do. And then the fire randoms, of course, are going to get up to fire 3, which means they can do some nice things like Fire Cloud, or, you know, like later in the game they can do Pillar of Fire, wherever that is. They're not going to be able to do Smokeless Fire, though, but Pillar of Fire, here it is. Flame Eruption, not bad also. So anyway, there's a bunch of stuff in Evocation they can kind of do. But if you look at it, they're like 3 times the cost almost of these guys. So are they going to do 3 times more than these guys? Not really, I don't think. Not often. And then we have these guys, the Human Sahir, and they have fire and air built in, which means you're going to be getting some fire 2 varieties and some air 2 varieties. Now these guys are really good. They are really, really good. What this means is the fire ones are going to be, we'll just pull it up again, because it's going to be the same spells, but I'll just click on them. The fire ones, when they do Phoenix Power, are going to be able to do Smokeless Flame, which is really good. It's 45 armor piercing damage that has a huge 10 area of effect to ignite people. And then where it hits, it's going to be doing 15 fatigue. So yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty damn good. Like, this will destroy super combatants. So, you know, yeah, it's super good. The air ones can do Scorching Wind, which is pretty nice. And then they're also just going to, you know, with Storm Power, they're going to be able to do Thunderstrike. So, pretty good. Pretty darn good. And I would say you would only want to get these, like, normally I would say you would only want to get these. There isn't a reason why I don't say that. And that is because I think with this nation, the way I see it, we have to get into talking about all the troops, but this is a nation that can do battlefield wipes very well. And it's a nation which would love to rush Evocation. And rushing Evocation is one of those weird things. It's very finicky. You have to kind of, you know, you can lose all your eggs pretty easily. And there's some major counters to it too. So, I mean, rushing Evocation has a lot of problems. But if you catch your enemy and you were prepared to do Evocation stuff and they're not, and we drop an early Firestorm on them, they're basically just going to lose. Like, there's not a ton of other things that can happen aside from them just immediately losing. The problem is, you know, some people are going to have fire resistance, some people are going to have shock resistance, and we have to deal with, like, the scragglers who have those things. So that's why we kind of want to have a mage core to do Pillar of Fire and Thunderstrike and the Scorching Winds and all these other things to kind of take out whatever riffraff is left over after we do all the battlefield wipes. And the problem with these guys is they can spend the first turn doing shock resistance, they can spend the next turn doing fire resistance, and then they're going to be we'll get one of them. I'll show you. So, you know, we can have this idiot come in. We'll send him in with an army. And we can script him to do protection from fire, protection from lightning, Phoenix Power, advance and cast spells, which would be kind of like the script you give him. Hold an attack, hold fire. And oh, actually, this kind of could work. I was thinking for a second, it was only 5. Shit, this actually could work. Oh boy. Because, yeah, 10 fire shock resistance is going to allow them to survive the battlefield wipes. I think that's actually okay. So, yeah, you can use these guys, too. And these guys are a lot better. The thing you can also do, though, and this is where I was going with this, but I might change my build after some of this. The thing about them is, unless you want to spend those first 2 turns of your script casting those, then they will get killed by your battlefield wipes when you do Firestorm and Wrathful Skies, which I think is how I want to play this nation, like really go deep into evocation. But they're way more useful because even the Earth randoms, which are like not terribly good, they can still do like Flying Shield and potentially Rain of Stones and some other stuff, if you get them boots. And anyway, so but the Earth ones are mostly going to be your lab rats. The fire and air ones are going to be really good. So anyway, these guys are pretty good. They're pretty damn good. Yeah. So maybe I need to rethink it. Next up, we have now the Hoary. We're going to talk about in a minute. We get the Hoary, and then the Shaytan, and then the Ifrit Sultan. These are guys that get unlocked when our god comes online. So we'll talk about those in a minute. The Yen Sahir. These guys are Fire 2, Air 2 with a Fire, Air, Earth random. This means the Earth ones are going to be your best thugs. These guys can cloud trapeze and thug real well. The air ones are going to be, well, just probably casters because Air 3 is really good. They can do Storm and Fog Warriors and stuff. And Fog Warriors, they need to wait for Storm power, but yeah, they're really good. And then the Fire ones, probably also going to be casters, right? But the Earth ones are thugs and the other 2 are probably casters. But they can do all the stuff the other guys could do, except much better. And they've got really good stats. They're ethereal, they've got glamour, they've got obfuscate, which hides part of your army, which is kind of cool, and they've got unseen. So they're pretty badass. I do like these guys. They're outshined by the Shaytan, though, who's more expensive but more better. Then we have the Yen Emir, and these are interesting. They have better leadership than these guys. These guys only have 20 leadership, whereas these guys have 85. These guys have a little bit better magic leadership, though. And these basically have the same paths as the human Sahir, whereas they're Fire, Air with a random of Fire, Air, Earth. And they're sacred. So if you have a Bless, you can put it on them. They're mostly just better leaders. And they're going to have, I think, better leadership for your genies if you're leading them around. They have better Taskmaster, too. So if you're going to be leading some of your slaves around, they're pretty good for that. But yeah, their magic paths aren't really as good. They have lower upkeep than these guys, but I think these guys are more useful mages to the degree that I wouldn't worry about the upkeep. So the other thing is these guys have armor. So if you're using these guys for expansion, they're a lot less likely to die to a random arrow or something than these dudes. These guys are still going to want to do air shield or something turn 1, but still. Next up we have, we're going to do now the guys you can recruit from your capital once you get these guys. So you can get 3 Hoary a turn, and Hoary are seducers. By themselves, they aren't great. They're ethereal, which is nice. They can fly, which is nice. And they have glamour, which is nice, and they're unseen, which is nice. But they don't have a weapon. They're kind of going to get wrecked by a lot of things in assassination. So these guys really do require some kind of item. Like handful of acorns, and maybe these guys, like handful of acorns and a decent weapon, except their attack skill's kind of garbage, could be okay, or like an amulet of the dead or something, and then they could maybe do it with a handful of acorns. I don't know. They're not great. We can leave it at that. But you can get 3 of them, and there's a certain strength. Quantity is its own quality. So if you can get the item production out to get these guys, you could, totally make an argument for having like 10 or 15 of these guys running around in a little stack. But you need a lot of items, and they're going to fail sometimes, and they're not going to be super successful. What's nice about them is that they have scale walls, and they can fly. So they have pretty good map move. It's going to be really hard to pin these guys down. And scale walls means they can get you while you're inside a fort with an enemy army on top of it. So, I mean, that's kind of oppressive, actually. So anyway, you've got these guys. Next up, we have the Shaytan. Now, these guys are super good. They take 2 recruitment points. When your cap gets unlocked, we also get an upgrade so that you can get like 1.5 of these guys a turn. And God, Shaytan are so good. They're so good. First of all, they have Corrupt, which is a check against, I think, 13 morale. So a lot of guys are going to fail the check, whereas with Seduction, you very rarely, like, do you get seduced? Like, normally seducers are just assassins, where you have, like, a very small chance of getting the guy. Shaytans are going to get enemy mages a very large percentage of the time. They're very effective at that. So anyway, we've got that. They're unseen. They've basically got the genie kit. They're also spies, which means we can get score graphs for people. And because they're mages and spies, you're gonna get like magic research graphs and stuff if you sneak them on their cap. And if you've got this guy on their cap, you might as well try to steal a cap-only mage. They come in a few varieties. Fire, air, earth, and blood. This is your only native blood access. And these guys are how you're going to bootstrap your blood economy. The blood ones can also join in Sabbaths in a pinch. But yeah, these guys, they can make elementals in assassinations. The earth ones can act as thugs. I mean, they can all kind of thug, but it's pretty easy to do counter thuggy stuff. So anyway, yeah, these guys pretty solid. While we're on the topic of assassinations, there's a few pretty damn good spells. One of them is Incinerate. This is really good in assassinations. You just turn one, zap somebody, and then they're messed up because it's always going to hit. So anyway, that's one of the things your Fire 3s can do. Your airs might be better off doing like air elementals or something. And yeah, these guys are super good. I don't know what to say. I mean, if you could make them all, you really never want to stop making them. They're just that good. Next up, we have the Ifrit Sultan, and these guys are special. Importantly, they take 6 commander points, so you're getting one of these instead of 3 Shaytan, which that's a hard pill to swallow because Shaytan are so good. That said, you probably still want some of them because at Fire 4, they're going to be very good Firestorm casters. Also, one of your guys can only be led by them, but it's questionable whether you want to make these or not. It'll be a little dependent on whether you choose to take any bless. What's important about them? Well, they can be Fire 4, which in combat gets them up to Fire 5 with Phoenix Power. They could be Air 3, which is pretty good, but it's not exceptional. You have other Air 3 mages. What is exceptional is they can be Earth 2. This is your highest Earth access on the nation. What's also exceptional is you get Astral. It's your only Astral access. And it, importantly, is Astral Earth. The other thing that's important about Astral is it gives you access to Solar Eclipse. And Solar Eclipse is something that's really good on this nation because almost all your guys have Spirit Sight. And, yeah. So anyway, Solar Eclipse is good. The problem is the Astral ones are very vulnerable to Magic Duel. So there's that. And these guys are also, like, super combatant tier if things don't have Salt. They importantly have Firepower, which is an addition to the normal Genie kit. And they also have Fire Shield, so things are going to burn up pretty darn good attacking them. But yeah, these guys are super good. They're super good. They're just, you have to sacrifice 3 Shaytan to get one, so it kind of sucks. So we've been through all the mages. Now what we're going to talk about is the troops. So we have 2 Recruit Anywhere troops. We've got, so you can get them here. We can get these guys, and then these idiots. So what is exceptional about them? Well, we've got a few things. They've got these dudes who are basically super cheap short bows that can pillage. And then they hit okay. And they've got these guys who have their little birdie with them, and they have a composite bow, which is a really good bow for the early age. They're kind of expensive, 22 gold. But like for Nabah, these are pretty good for Nabah. The thing is, in the Middle Age, a composite bow is not that great because things tend to have better armor. In the Early Age, it's pretty good. It's one of the better bows in the Early Age. And then what's important too about these guys is these birds are distractions. And what's nice about distractions is, you know who really likes distractions? It's genies. Genies really like distractions because as long as they're not getting harassed down, they're really hard to hit. And these guys just, they make it a little harder to harass people down. Also, what's worth pointing out, we have another archer. And so we have 3 different archer varieties, and this one's a slave, so super low upkeep. He has some morale issues. But what this means is we are a nation of air and fire, and we have really good archers. And what that means is we potentially can do these massive archer plays with things that we already are kind of going to want. Like, we don't really want enchantment that much. But Enchantment 4, we kind of do want for Cloud Trapeze. Higher than that, we don't really want. But Enchantment 4 also gives us Flaming Arrows. So depending on who we're fighting, Flaming Arrows can be really good. And Wind Guide and stuff, really good. So a lot of the things that people are going to want to use to kill, like, let's say you're fighting Vanheim, right? And so Vanheim's going to have all these little Vanheers that are going to be running at you like little crazy, angry things. Well, Vanheers, they can have good protection once they go berserk and stuff, but they can also kind of get picked apart by a shit ton of archers. So anyway, massing archers is definitely a strategy that we can do with Ubar, because they're going to have Wind Guide, they're going to have Flaming Arrows, they're going to be hurting like a mother, and then they're going to have all these little freaking birds in there distracting them. It's going to be beautiful. Next up, we get the Uberian Soldier. These guys, well, I mean, what can we say? They're a slave, so they have morale issues, but they're cheap. And they have a javelin. So highly massable javelin. Again, not bad. I think these do benefit from flaming weapon, or, yeah. Yeah. For some reason, I'm like forgetting flaming arrows. Yeah. They do benefit, I believe, from flaming arrows. Next up, we have these guys who are bodyguards. They're expensive, sort of. They're also slaves, so they're like slave bodyguards, which are kind of interesting thing. Yeah, they have pretty good stats. 13 attack with 17 damage. Pretty good. If you're going to be dealing with like Pangea or something, these can make a big difference. Having a few of these with your commander and then giving your commander some gems so they can summon an elemental. Could make a big deal. A big difference. Next up, we have the Ghouls, and these guys have fire resistance and poison resistance. They cost 20 gold, and they have an upkeep. What's interesting is you can also summon Ghouls with blood slaves. And if you summon Ghouls, they have no upkeep. So it's kind of interesting. Their regen is actually amazing. It's 50%. So if you can give these guys protection buffs, they really do not want to die. But you have to kind of give them a lot of protection buffs. And they tend to get hit really hard by things like iron, and then they have the salt vulnerability, and they're demons. So there's demons, these are all bad tags. But this is a really good tag, 50% regen. There's also special things that these guys scream out for, which is they're very good in Soul Vortex Turbo Communion batteries, which we can talk about in the advanced section. But anyway. Next, so we have the Djinn Warrior. These guys are the guys we can get at the beginning. They have a bronze scimitar. They're 50 gold, and they have storm immunity, magic power, all the stuff we were talking about. They're magic beings, so they get also wrecked by moonblades. But they have cold vulnerability, so that's kind of a, it's an issue. It's an issue. Yeah, it's definitely an issue. So. But these guys are pretty excellent. They can expand super well. They can struggle. The thing is, when you're playing Ubar, and this is something we're expecting, you pick Ubar in a game, especially if you pick first and you're on YouTube, then most of the time people try to counter you. But in general, I think even like anybody that picks Ubar in a game, you should expect people to get Spirit Sight and magic weapons. It's a thing. So once people have Spirit Sight, then this Unseen, which is a major part of why these guys are effective, goes away, right? So they're going to lose that. then the ethereal's going to go away to magic weapons. So then we're just looking at people with like fire and shock resistance, the cold vulnerability that can fly, that have reasonably bad attack density, and not terribly excellent combat stats that also have vulnerability to iron and to salt. In magic power, the attack and defense are pretty good, even with things with magic weapons and stuff, you know, and it's going to be like 15-15, which is going to be pretty solid, even when you're having the penalty. But these are really expensive units for that. So, yeah, it's going to be an issue. The thing is, if people are doing that, you know, they can't put Unseen and... I mean, they can't put Spirit Sight and other stuff on their PD. So generally, you don't have to fight them necessarily. Next up, we have the Guardian of the Forbidden Chambers. What's important about these guys is they have magic weapons now that hit harder. So you can see it's 16 attack, which is a good bit higher. 20 damage, 20 magic damage. And I think they have Bodyguard, which is different. I think otherwise they're pretty similar. The defense stat is higher also. So once they get in Magic 3, it's going to be 18, which we're now getting into like the very high territory. Unfortunately, their protection's not as good. They have this guy has 13 protection, 16 head, 13 body, whereas these guys have 0 or 1 head and 12 body. So you can see it's... Yeah, they gotta kind of get 1 hit if they get popped on the head. They do have a bit more HP too, though. I think they're better than the Djinn Warrior. In a lot of cases, maybe not if you have arrows coming down and hitting them, but in a lot of cases, they're going to be better than the Djinn Warrior. The problem is they cost more. I don't think they're 50% better, but it depends. If you need these magic weapons, like especially if you need hard hitting, high attack magic weapons, like you're dealing with super combatants, it can be the case these guys will just get completely wrecked by a super combatant, whereas enough of these guys will just kill them. So I could understand switching over to these guys. Also, if you're going to be dealing with things like elemental spam or something, you know, like you're going into a lot of mages, these magic weapons make a big difference against fire and air elementals and stuff. I don't think they have better resistances. No, I think that's the same. So yeah, I think the general thing would be recruit these guys even when you have the access to upgrade and recruit these, unless you think you're going to need them. And it could be it's worth just doing a mix, because sometimes having a few magic weapons guys mixed in is going to be worth it. And finally, for the recruitable troops, we have the Ifrit Warrior. And the Ifrit Warrior is, basically he has this really hard-hitting enchanted scimitar. He has pretty good protection, though he doesn't have very good head protection. He's sacred. He has a heat aura, which is new. His fire resistance is even better. He's very vulnerable to salt. He's got a fire shield, and he's got fire power. So in Heat 3, Fire 3, in Heat 3, Magic 3, he's going to have a bonus of 6 to all his stats. So he's going to be 17 defense and 21 attack, which this gets a bonus 3 also, so he's going to be like 24 attack. So he's going to hurt. The main problem with these guys, there's 2 problems. One is you can only get 1 a turn, and the second problem is they have to be led by Ifrit Sultans, and you don't really want to get that many Ifrit Sultans, because if you're getting them, you're not getting Shaytan. They can also be led by Marid, but that's way later. So they're kind of hard to mass, but they're kind of special forces, and I think they actually have a role. A lot of people say don't recruit them ever. I think they work pretty good as bodyguards. If we're going to be doing battlefield wipe evocation plays, because they're going to be kind of hard to kill super duper efficiently. And they're sacred, so potentially if we get shock resistance on them, they can be really immune during some of the shenanigans. So these are the troops we get. The ones that we can summon, we have a few summons. We can get Hin, we can get a Salat. This is a seducing commander. We can probably, I don't know if can I get them? 1 second. Oh, I have to be in a wasteland. But anyway, they're basically, I think they're Fire 1, Air 2, Earth 1. And they're a seducer, human. Then we've got the Bin and the Marid. We'll show you all these. So this is a Marid, and it's Fire 4, Air 4, Earth 2. These guys can get things of elemental mastery once you have construction 6, because they can do both water boosters, and then that will get them up. And so then from this point, they really could be like, they'd be water 4 to do the staff, and then once they have the staff, they'd be water 5. So they could do Queen of Water Elementals. The thing is, you know, these guys are really high in conjuration, so you won't be getting them until pretty much like pretty far in the late game. They're pretty awesome. I mean, they've got firepower and magic power, and basically the normal kit. They also have fear, and they're amphibious, which is kind of cool. They're your biggest air mages, which I think is the most important thing about them. But, you know, they're expensive. If we look at the cost, they're 60, which is pretty pricey. I mean, I think they're worth it, but you know, they're not cheap. There's nothing about that that's cheap or budget. But they're probably worth 60 water gems. Anyway, these are the Marid. Next up, we have the ghouls that you summon from blood hunting. Oh, though I don't think it's these ones. I think because I wished for this guy. I think this is the one you recruit normally. What's important I want to point out again about Bin is, about ghouls, is they have poison resistance and fire resistance, and a ton of regen, which means they're probably going to be pretty okay dealing with a lot of battlefield wipes, being just a meat line in front. The Hin are interesting because they have a lot of the genie kit. They have ethereal, they have unseen. They additionally have very high shock resistance, 15, and they have very high pretty high fire resistance. So these guys actually, they're a little expensive to get. These Hin, 6 gems gets you 5. So they're like 1 gem per. They're not super cheap. They're not super expensive. Yeah, they're kind of expensive, right? Like, you're not going to have a bajillion of them. But they make very good bodyguards if you're doing evocation wipes. Next up, we have the Bin. These are kind of hard for you to recruit because these are the water ones. Water air, which, like, you'd be using a Marid to summon these. I don't really know how you would be summoning these in any reasonably kind of efficient way. But anyway, if you choose somehow to get them, either having a Marid or whatever summon them, they're interesting. They've got 5 shock resistance, they've got poison resistance, and some of the genie kit into attacks. I think these guys, you don't really see them in a game. These guys, though, you can see a lot, and these guys you can see a lot. Next up, we have the Gulas, and these are how you break into blood. So the way you break into blood with this is you get a blood Shaytan, who will be blood 1, and then once you're blood 1, you can do summon Gula. This can only be cast on a wasteland, costs 31 blood slaves, and then you get one of these fine ladies. And they are pretty amazing, actually, because they're, first of all, like blood death assassins, which the blood isn't very good for assassination, but the death's pretty okay. They've got fire and poison resistance. They're magic beings, and they're adept at finding blood slaves, which means if we put a sanguine dowsing rod on them, they are going to be even better, right? So these are going to blood hunt like a blood 3. So pretty good, actually, for that. You can actually have a really strong blood economy if you start getting into these guys reasonably early. The thing is, you have to get all the way down to blood 5. Ugh. Blood 5. I'm just kidding. Blood 5 is pretty good, but it's also kind of high. So I don't know. I think it depends. Like, for the late game, it's obviously good to break into these guys kind of early, but depending, you may not have that kind of space. You really might not. And I think we've been through almost all of the units. We get some really cool heroes. We get basically a better version of this one with Death 3, Blood 2, I think. And then we get a better version of the Marid, who also has Death built into them, I think. And maybe a couple other things, like maybe slightly higher paths somewhere. but he's really good. He's probably one of the better heroes. And then we get some crappy multi-heroes, which, are nothing to write home about. So that is basically the units. I want to spend more of the guide talking about the strategy. And there's a few, the strategy we have to talk about, what are the research priorities and stuff. And I've already obviously hinted that I think evocation might be the right way to go. 1 second. Pulling up my little notes for this. So there's 3 very interesting schools for this nation. Well, 1 second. We've got... Okay. Yeah, I've got my notes pulled up. So, I've got like a full spreadsheet I made of this. So I'm actually gonna quit and we're gonna pull off the mods here so I can actually show you it. I'll be able to show you the spell with the right path. The right level. So there's a few things we get that I think are really important. One of them, we're just going to talk about evocation, because in my opinion, that is the way to play this nation, is like an evocation nation. We can do a ton of things. In air, we're going to have lots of timings. We get Shockwave very early, which can be really good on thugs if we're fighting things that don't have magic resistance. We get Scorching Wind, which is going to be very good at dealing with like super combatants and elites. That I don't think this is fire. I think this is just like MR negates fatigue damage, which is really good. We get Thunderstrike and Storm. Storm is going to be really nice for shutting down archer game if we're not bringing our own archers. So yeah, Storm can be super duper good. And then we get Wrathful Skies. And Wrathful Skies and Storm is just one of the things that if you have shock resistance and somebody else doesn't, and you cast it, they're basically going to lose. If you're fighting like giant-sized units and they're charging you, there's a chance the giant-sized units will kill you before Wrathful Skies will finish them off. But, that can be dealt with in other ways too. So, it's really good. Orb Lightning spam and stuff is really good if we're dealing with stuff that doesn't have shock resistance. So yeah, there's a ton of good stuff here. In fire, we get really good things also. Fire, we get Smokeless Flame. This will kind of delete super combatant or thugs. We get Firestorm, which this... it's easier to counter than... basically once Army of Gold comes out, Firestorm stops working. So, whereas Wrathful Skies is usually, unless people take it in their Bless, it's relevant all game. Firestorm can become irrelevant, but if we rush Evocation, people are not going to have Army of Gold most likely, and we're going to force them to change their tech priorities, because otherwise they can't fight us unless they have it. The other thing that's noteworthy about Firestorm is it kills things way faster than Wrathful Skies if they don't have fire resistance. It just does so much damage so quickly to the whole battlefield. So Firestorm is like a game-winning spell if you get it at a very good timing and you have fire resistance. And Pillar of Fire is extremely good. It's a very good spell, but you have to go high in Evocation. It's Evocation 8, which is very hard to get to. Now, if you're rushing up Evocation, there's a few things that we also want to talk about. Death Air has really good Evocation stuff. Stygian Rains, Death Water, also super nice. So you could make an argument for having a Pretender that has Death, Water, and Air, and his job is just, or her job is to just come with you on important, important battles once you get some of these timings. Like, just having Wailing Winds in combat can totally change things. So... yeah. The other thing that is pretty good within Evocation is Maelstrom. But to cast Maelstrom, you need to be Water 6. Not super duper easy. And you also, potentially, if we go all the way up here, we get Flames from the Sky, which we could definitely make use of. And we get Celestial Rainbow if we took this in our Bless. But yeah, Evocation 9 might be overdoing it, but God, if we get up to Evocation 7 or 8, there's a lot of good stuff there. And then there's an argument to be made for going all the way up to 9. Because, like a Firestorm 2, especially if you're doom stacking and you have to force the enemy to doom stack, and then you Flames from the Sky them. It doesn't even matter if they have it in their blast. If you hit them with 2 Flames from the Skies, they're gonna be toast. So yeah, that's that. What next? In Alteration, we have a lot of actually pretty interesting things. Oh, there's one more thing I want to mention about Evocation. One thing is we have a bunch of flyers. We don't have great Earth access, right? We can really only get up to Earth 3 with our Earth power on our Shaytan. On our Ifrit Sultan. And those are going to be very rare. We might have one guy who can do that. So unless you have Earth on your god, you're not really going to be able to do Earthquake very easily, but it is something that would be very good on this nation. Next up, we have Alteration. Now, Alteration, there's a few things I want to talk about. Obviously, we're a Fog Warriors capable nation, so this is something to keep in mind. And that's kind of obvious. We're not, if we can get mass protection, it would be awesome, but we need to have indies, and we need to have Sight Search Nature, and we need a Thistle Mace and some other things. Mass protection is something we can do, and it's very good because we have fire resistance on our troops, so it's something we should look at. But it's also going to be a little tricky since we don't have any nature mages, that we can normally recruit. Okay, so that's that. It's also going to be important for a lot of our buffs, like Iron Skin on our Earth randoms and Temper Flesh. So that's important. And if we have any death, Darkness is really good for this nation. So anyway, there's that. But we can't really do it until we have Gula communions, which is kind of tricky. So I don't know when, how, if we'll be getting that. But the timing, it'd be kind of late. So anyway, these are things we can do in Darkness, and Death. And then Earth has some other interesting things. One of them is at Alt 6, which is Iron Bane. And we have Iron Vulnerability, which means people are going to come hit us with iron weapons. The thing with that, though, is that can be turned into a liability against them if we put Iron Bane down. Because as it turns out, not only are we weak to iron, but none of our units have iron. All of our weapons and armor are not made of iron. So this actually is a very good spell for Ubar, and I think it's one thing that gets passed over a lot. But for us, it's really good. Especially if we're struggling to hit through really, hard to hit stuff. It can be really nice. Because Djinn, they don't hit for a boatload of damage. So there's that. And then obviously later, if we get Marble Warriors, we can cast on small groups of Djinn. If we're not worried about cold damage, it can be really good. And then Army and Golden stuff, of course, is good later. There's also some slightly interesting things here. We've got Incinerate, which is at Fire 5. At level 5, we get Incinerate. This can be absolutely debilitating. It's going to mean... One of the things you have to worry about is how are you going to kill stuff that's immune to Djinns? Like a super combatant or like a Neefel Jarl or something, right? Incinerate's one of those ways you can do it because it's armor negating damage. The only thing that's going to block it is if they have enough fire resistance. So now it's okay, you have to have a bajillion shock resistance, you have to have a bajillion fire resistance. We're going to be doing stuff that makes you need Scorching Winds, which means you're going to fatigue out unless you can do really high MR checks against the fatigue damage. We can also do Solar Eclipse on our Astral Randoms if we're fighting a nation that doesn't have Astral Mages. So that's a thing. Yeah. And then Phoenix Pyre obviously is very good for us too, if we get all the way up to 7. So yeah, there's some definitely cool stuff in Fire too. In Enchantment, the things we don't, we could go for what are the things to look at in Enchantment? You could make a play for Eternal Pyre. There's a very strong reason too. The thing is, Enchantment globals end up getting fought for a lot. Other schools don't, and we potentially don't need to go down Enchantment very far. The things we probably are going to want are Flaming Arrows, and we're probably going to want Cloud Trap Piece. So we're definitely going to want up to 4. Watchers is kind of nice for a blood economy. So, yeah. I mean, there's some nice stuff here. Strength of Giants is pretty good, and Flying Shield's pretty good for thugs. So there's some nice things in Enchantment, but I don't think it's going to be the game-winning thing for us. But it depends on like what indies we find and other things like that. Thaumaturgy is pretty interesting. Thaumaturgy, the big thing with Thaumaturgy is we're an air nation that can spin the crap out of some air gems. So Galegate would be super nice, and nobody ever fights you for Galegate because nobody ever goes Thom 8. And it's hard to cast. So anyway, there's an option to do a Thom Rush. And you might say, okay, well, but then we have Galegate, but how do we actually win wars? Because we just get completely wrecked because none of this shit is useful to us. And you would be mostly right. None of this shit really is that useful to you. Confusion's not a bad spell, so you could use that, but, we're grasping at straws here when I'm telling you, like, oh, we could go to Thom 8 for Confusion. The thing that is very useful is Dark Skies. And if we can control Galegate and we have Dark Skies, it means in High Dominion, we will literally be stealing everybody with our seducers. Like, everybody. You come in our Dominion, you get seduced. It would be just as simple as that. Anyway, it's something to keep in mind. I think this is like an excellent play for Ubar. So kind of where I'm at right now is there's some little bits and bobs we need, like construction early, some alteration early, some enchantment early. The first thing we go high in, and then we need some conjuration early for assassinations and, like the storm power, earth power, fire power, all that stuff. So you need conjuration 3, we're going to need like alteration 3 or 4. Maybe we go up to alt 5 and get that all-important solar eclipse if we can. But if people have spirit sight, doesn't matter. Anyway, we do some of that garbage, right? But then we go up evocation, and we get evocation 6. And then if you don't have shock resistance, you're screwed. But we keep going. We go to evocation 7. Now, because that timing on Firestorm matters so much. And so we hit that evocation 7, and it's like, holy shit. Nobody can fight me unless you have fire resistance. So anyway, that's awesome. And then after that, we're going to be at this like huge power spike. And I think what we could do, we could either make a play in Enchantment, try to get like Eternal Pyre, or we could go straight for Thaumaturgy and control Galegate. And if we have Galegate, and from Galegate we use that to control Dark Skies, with like a high cast Dark Skies, like we can't be attacked. And then potentially, because if we went Evocation, and maybe we go up to Evocation 8 before we hit Thom 8, so we can get things like Maelstrom, which is going to be really good for doing Marids and stuff later. But if we go Thaumaturgy 2, now you're starting to see some of the synergy. If we go Thaumaturgy and we got Maelstrom, that means we also are going to have Vengeful Waters. So now you're looking at like something really cancerous to attack into. The problems with this nation are we're going to be a little weak until our god wakes up, and we're a lot of those things we want to do require research, and we're going to be fighting people that are going to have some bless so that they just delete these dudes. So if we rely on these dudes too heavily, we kind of get spanked, I think. So having a mix of like these idiots plus like fire composite bows plus like elemental spam, we're gonna need to pull out all sorts of things, and like seducers to get through the first couple years. If we get through that, we're gonna be in a pretty interesting position. So I think we're gonna call it there for this episode, but I'm gonna go ahead and start recording the Pretender design, so tune back in a couple days and we'll do the Pretender design video. Cheers.